Hi, I'm Chad with Move For Guitar. This lesson is from our series, How to Memorize Guitar Notes. In this lesson, I'm going to show you how all the natural notes belong to a specific scale and all the sharps and flats belong to a specific scale, and how you can use those scales to help memorize those notes up and down the fretboard. First off, if you like all the diagrams from this series, including the diagrams from this lesson, you can download our free e-guide, Memorize Guitar Notes. But I am working on it right now as I'm filming this lesson, so it might not be available as you're watching the lesson. But once it is available, a link will pop up on the screen that'll allow you to download it. And like I said, it's free, so there's no reason not to download it when it is available. This is part 12 from our series, How to Memorize Guitar Notes. If you'd like to go back and start at the beginning, you can click the link on the screen. So far I've shown tricks to help you find all the natural notes up and down the fretboard and how the sharps and flats just fall right between those natural notes, so it's really easy to find those as well. This lesson I'm going to actually show you scales that contain, one scale contains all the natural notes, one scale contains all the sharps and flats. So if you learn those two scales, which you may already know those scales, it's really easy to use those scales to help you find these notes up and down the fretboard and really lock in where they land. So at this point, if you don't know your major scales, if you don't know the patterns of major scales or of your minor pentatonic scales, it's important to learn because I'm going to be talking about those two scales in this lesson. And like I said, I'm just giving as many different tips and tricks as possible. And if you are a more advanced player who already knows scales and can play them, this is going to be one that'll probably help you out a lot. If you're not, you might need to go learn those scales first. Well, you will need to go learn those scales first. You can watch this lesson, but at some point you're going to have to learn those scales if you want to use this trick. And you can start with our series, Music Theory for Guitar. It's just a free series on YouTube. You can watch that, and I explain everything about major scales and minor pentatonic scales. Or there's lots of lessons online on YouTube that you can find to learn the different patterns for those scales. And the reason I'm teaching it this way is because a lot of players know how to play scales by patterns, but they don't actually know what notes they're playing. That's a really common thing on guitar, to be a pretty advanced player technically, where you can play lots of licks, you can play lots of scales, but you actually don't know what notes you're playing everywhere on your fretboard. Because on the guitar, it's really easy to break things apart in patterns. For example, you have a pattern of a chord, you have a pattern of a scale, and it's just easy to memorize those because our mind works in a way that's easy to recognize patterns and memorize them. But then that can kind of be a trap on the guitar after a while. I mean, it's important to learn things that way on the guitar. It really helps you to start learning quickly, but eventually that can become a trap if you don't break free from it, because then you're just always recognizing patterns and you're not actually recognizing what notes you're playing. And on most instruments, you learn the notes that you're playing right away. But on the guitar, a lot of players never learn what notes are actually playing up and down the fretboard, but it is really important if you want to advance as a guitarist. So first we're going to start with the natural notes, because I said all these natural notes fall into one scale. And the scale they fall into is the C major scale. It's also the A natural minor, A Aeolian mode, A pure minor scale, but just think about the C major scale for now. It just makes it easier. Those scales just contain the same notes as the C major scale. So the C major scale contains all of the natural notes. That's because the C major scale is just C, D, E, F, G, A, B. And if you know your steps for major scales, that's just whole step, half step, whole step, half step back to the root. So if you play your C major scale up and down your fretboard, you're playing all the natural notes on the whole fretboard. And then all the sharps and flats actually fall into a scale as well. And you're not going to combine both names at the same time, the sharp and the flat, so we'll just start with the flats. So if we turn everything to flats, these actually belong to the E flat minor pentatonic scale. So if you know your minor pentatonic scales, if you start on E flat right here, hopefully you can visualize that this is actually pattern 1 of the minor pentatonic scale. So you can see that if you take all the flat notes, it's just E flat minor pentatonic scale. Or you could turn them into sharps, which are just the exact same notes, so just inharmonic equivalents, same note, different name. It would just be the D sharp minor pentatonic scale, which typically you're going to hear it as E flat minor pentatonic instead of D sharp. But for now, it's important to visualize it both ways so that you recognize that this is a D sharp, but it's also an E flat. So if we go back to the C major scale for now, the way we can use that is if you know your major scale patterns, which if you know your major scales, you know your patterns, there's different patterns that you can use, but I'm just going to use the ones that I teach the most often, So this will work for any patterns that you use. But if you use, for example, the ones I teach, this is pattern 1, starting on the C on the 6th string, and it's just going in order of the scale, obviously, and it ends back on E on the 1st string. What you can do is just start with pattern 1 and play your scale, but instead of just mindlessly playing it and trying to get fast at playing the scale, play it really slowly and say the note names as you play them. So say C, D, E, really slowly as you're playing the notes up, and play them all the way up and all the way back down, just over and over again, saying the note names and visualizing what notes you're playing. And that's going to help lock in where these notes are on your fretboard. So now you're not just visualizing the pattern, you're visualizing the pattern so you know where these notes land, but you're saying the note names as you're visualizing the pattern so that you start recognizing where these notes land on your fretboard. And once you get really good with pattern 1 and do it so many times that you're able to visualize these are the actual notes and where they land on your fretboard, move to pattern 2 and do the exact same thing. Just go D, E, F, G, A, really slowly, play them in order all the way up, all the way back down. Don't just mindlessly do it by playing the pattern and using muscle memory. Do it with the muscle memory, but visualize where the notes are and say the notes as you play them. And then another trick you can do is to break these apart into 1-octave scales. So instead of going all the way up with pattern 1 to this 1st string, you can just play it in 1 octave, which just means that you start on a C and go to the next C, which is an octave apart. So now you play the scale really slowly, up 1 octave, just saying the notes as you play them all the way up to the octave, and then back down over and over again. But then you do it in as many different places as you can. So now you could start with this C and play a 1-octave pattern and do the same thing. So now you're covering a different part of your fretboard, and that just gives you smaller chunks to memorize instead of visualizing a bigger pattern. And you can do it all over. Any place that you have a C note, you have a C major scale that you can build from it, just 1 octave up, and do it over and over again. And eventually you're just going to recognize where all these notes land. Then if we go back to the sharps and flats, we'll start with the flats. So it'll be E flat minor pentatonic scale. You can do the same thing. Just start with pattern 1. If you know your minor pentatonic, everyone knows pattern 1. So now instead of just mindlessly playing this really fast up and down, you play it really slow and say the note names as you're playing it. Visualize where these notes are landing. Do it all the way up, all the way back down, really slow, over and over, just staying in pattern 1. And eventually you're going to recognize where these notes are landing. For example, you'll recognize really quickly that E flat lands right behind the 12th fret, which is an E. And this is really good training because lots of guitarists have a lot of trouble visualizing where flats land and so on. Or playing minor pentatonic scales, for example, in E flat. That's not very common for a guitarist, but if you get really good at that, that's just going to open up a whole nother world for you and make you a way better guitarist in general. And just stick with one pattern, do it over and over again, then you can move to pattern 2, do the same thing. You can break these up into smaller chunks. For example, you could just play E flat, G flat, A flat, B flat, and find those all over the fretboard, or you could do it in 1 octave, for example, from E flat to E flat, do that all over the place. And once you do it with the flats, then do it with the sharps as well. Even though I said that saying D sharp minor pentatonic isn't a very common name to call this, it'd usually be called E flat. But still, it's important to recognize that a D sharp is the same thing as an E flat, and F sharp is the same thing as a G flat, and so on. So it's important to do it with both names. So then just do it as D sharp minor pentatonic, play it really slowly, say the names D sharp, F sharp, all the way up, all the way back down, do it over and over again. And eventually you're going to really recognize where these notes are landing on your fretboard. Now once you do that, there's another trick that can really break you free and help you memorize where the notes are, and that's instead of playing patterns, just play the notes in order without visualizing patterns. So you're playing the notes in order, but you're playing it randomly up and down. And what I mean by that is you can start with your lowest note. If we start with C major scale again, and we're doing the natural notes. If you start on the 6th string and just go from E to F, you're just playing these notes in order, but instead of playing some sort of pattern that you've memorized, which usually stays in some sort of position, a certain amount of fret spaces, you just play them randomly. So you could play to here, and then you could go after that C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. All of a sudden you've played these horizontally up the fretboard as one big pattern instead of breaking it up into multiple patterns. And this will really help you visualize where these notes land on your fretboard. And this is tough to do at first if you're not used to it because we get so used to patterns. But just start Start with your lowest note, play E, F, G. You could go in any type of order, just don't stick in any specific pattern. Play it up, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. And then when you play it down, play it in a different order. So if you're starting from this A, if that was the highest note you could reach, you could play A, G, F, E, D, C, B, A, G, F, E, D, C, and so on. And then over time, you're just going to totally lock down where these notes land on your fretboard. And not only will this help for memorizing the fretboard, this will help you as an improviser as well, so that you're not stuck playing in position, which a lot of guitarists do. For example, they'll learn one pattern in position, but then they get really stuck into that and it's hard to break free. If you play it randomly horizontally, you're just going to open up your whole fretboard and be able to play anywhere you want up and down the fretboard at any time. And then do the same thing with the minor pentatonic. Just start as low as you can, which would be your G flat note, and just play it up without playing any specific sort of pattern. And just do it as high as you can go, and then do it in a different order on the way back down, and that's just going to really set you ahead and make you a really good guitarist over time, along with helping you memorize where all the notes on your fretboard are. So you can see that with just those two scales, that's every single note on your fretboard. If you really focus on those two scales, you're going to know where all the notes on your fretboard are. And maybe this is the only trick you need. Maybe you don't need to use the other tricks. And maybe this is a funner trick, so it's funner to play a scale instead of just randomly playing notes. So try it out, see if it works for you, and check out the other tricks as well. Try to combine them, just see what works best for you. Like I said, everyone learns differently. So that's how you can use the C major scale and the E flat minor or the D sharp minor pentatonic scales to find all the notes up and down the fretboard. Go ahead and move on to the next lesson, where I'm going to show you more tricks for memorizing all the notes on your fretboard. And be sure to subscribe, because we had at least one new lesson every day.